Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Spellbinder Reports. I'm going to do one of these videos. It's a two-parter on the FDA, the Food of Death Administration, and the World Trade Organization, and the UN Codex Alimentarius. It's from Well TV, and it's a good documentary. It's only 28 minutes long, and it will be in two parts. This is be part one. And as you'll see in this, that we are being made sick and sickly so the pharmaceutical companies can make big profits off of our sickness till we die, and they'll drain us till we're dead. And this is how it goes.
We're here today to defend the most basic of all human rights, the right to health and the right to life.
They rush to the office and treat us like common criminals. Hey, get your hands up. Get them up right now.
Freeze! Hey, got it. Tell me about it. Vitamina! Vitamina! Vitamina!
Tens of millions of men were cheated out of an effective, non-toxic therapy. Just cheated out of it and forced to buy an expensive, dangerous therapy that is only half as good. And that upsets me. I'm angry about that.
If there's a higher corporate good to be served by breaking the law, by having the FDA work with the Codex and try and drag the U.S. into this nightmare, then they're all for it.
Codex is bad. It's bad for a lot of people, and it's bad for the very people who need it the most. And it's the power that's in the W.T.O. that we have to deal with ultimately, and I don't like the trend.
Turn the camera off.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror.
Fear. Its darkness causes humanity to make awful choices. With dreadful power, fear can rule our lives and paralyze lofty hopes and dreams in an instant. It is the antithesis of God, the destructive dark side. It is the ghost that haunts the mind, a universal trait, a global affliction, and deployed all too often by those intent on inflicting control over the masses.
Fear preys on the most vulnerable among us. Fear sells, and nowhere is fear peddled more shamelessly than in the fields of medicine and human nutrition.
Fear anesthetizes us. It coerces us, making us believe that we can do little on our own to prevent or treat disease, and forces whole nations to kneel at the altars of the drug industry.
And of course the fearmongers are also preying on fear of disease. And the solution that the fearmongers give us are drugs. Yet drugs are the single most dangerous thing we can put in our mouths.
It's a sad fact that pharmaceuticals have become the dope of modern man. And make no mistake, we are addicted. Last year, between 3 and 5 billion prescriptions were written in the US alone. And for all of its many miracles and heroism, the pharmaceutical fantasy has also left disaster in its wake. The tragedies of drug side effects are being exposed daily. Prozac, Vioxx, Celebrex, Baycol, Lariam, and Zoloft, just to name a few, are deeply uncomfortable reminders that secrecy and sales have often circumvented safety. There is also the crippling burden of health insurance and the millions who are debilitated by a wave of red ink, bankrupted as a result of an unexpected illness that they could not afford. As if by design, health choices are limited, information is scarce, lives are ruined, and the truth be damned.
Business is business, and people don't like competition, and those things, smart business people may not always do something that's best for the people or for someone's health.
In addition to these painful realities of life, however, an abundance of evidence now suggests that this holy reverence towards modern medicine may be killing us.
I wrote Death by Modern Medicine, inspired actually after writing a paper called Death by Medicine. And what I found after analyzing government databases and peer-reviewed journal articles, I found that 784,000 people are dying annually, prematurely, due to modern medicine intervention. And also found studies that said we're only capturing 5 to 20% of the actual deaths.
We're clear that the status quo is equal to a premature death in this country. Someone needs to stand up and scream and say, foul, something's gone awry. Somebody needs to stop this madness and say to the public, there's a better option. We will no longer accept the status quo.
But the fear machine is well oiled by petrochemical dollars and a near worldwide monopoly in healthcare. It works overtime to prevent the truth about dietary supplements from getting out to the public. Governments, particularly in Europe and the United States, seem all too eager to comply with the robber barons of healthcare. It has always been so, as evidenced by this 40-year-old government film, which is but one of many in their arsenals.
But it's still the same old snake oil.
During the 1990s, however, despite generations of institutional bias, American consumers won critical battles against the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the medical pharmaceutical establishment.
In the mid-90s, there were movements to put all supplements on a prescription basis. And in all the countries in the world where they've done that, it more than doubled the cost and made them not available. And it's really a freedom of choice issue. It's not a company manufacturer issue. It's a consumer's issue. So we were fighting for the right to have access for our own use, our own families, and our own businesses. And fortunately, the healthy consumer felt the same way. We actually were able to marshal, one day in a period of hours, 1 million phone calls to the government. It was really a citizens' uprising.
This massive consumer movement for healthcare freedom was invigorated when the FDA became enveloped in controversy of its own making. The agency approved a guns-drawn raid at the clinic of Dr. Jonathan Wright and also raided dozens of health food stores in a premeditated power grab. Consumer outrage fueled Hollywood to become immersed in the debate, and actors like James Earl Jones and Sharon Stone became part of a national campaign for healthcare freedom of choice. When Mel Gibson came aboard, he documented his views in memorable fashion.
Hey, got it. It's only vitamin. Vitamin C, like in oranges.
The result of the consumer outcry was that DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, passed overwhelmingly in 1994. This became the only national law that linked the use of nutrients in dietary supplements to reduced risk of disease. And since DSHEA helped ensure relatively free access to a wide range of dietary supplements for consumers, activists pulled back from the front lines, thinking that their struggles were over. Others, like Joe Bassett, knew better.
We're in a particular industry, for the sake of a better term, the health food industry, that's always been under attack. It's never stopped. It still isn't stopping because you have vested interests. In our country, you have everybody using vested interests, and the ones that are really entrenched use the government.
I believe DSHEA has always been under attack, except for the first few years after DSHEA was passed. The present attacks are very broad, which means worldwide, and some of the attacks are just specific to the United States.
Now, a bureaucratic shadow called Codex Alimentarius threatens to silence the opposition forever, both here and abroad. But Codex began innocuously enough in 1963 as a creation of two arteries of the United Nations, the Food and Agricultural Organization and the World Health Organization. Back then, nearly everyone endorsed their two major goals, to provide nutritious foods for developing nations and to shape guidelines for dangerous industrial chemicals in the food supply. Within the past decade, however, Codex Alimentarius has altered its mission dramatically, many say negatively so, to include a wide swathe of products including dietary supplements and genetically modified organisms. Mr. Scott Tipps began serving as a U.S. delegate to Codex in June of 2000. During the first meetings, he did everything he could to communicate with the head of the U.S. delegation.
I, in a flurry of notes, passed comments and suggestions and the like to Elizabeth Yetley, who was the American delegate there, and it made no impact. In fact, the only impact I had was to call her during a break and basically be very tough with her about a particular clause that she was trying to remove from the final report. That particular sentence or clause basically said that the United States supports the right of consumers to have free access to vitamins and minerals, and she had unilaterally yanked that from the final reports.
This attitude by Ms. Yetley, who is an employee of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, is reflective of Codex meetings in general. In an attempt to shine light on those who are unilaterally making public policy in private, health freedom advocate John Hamill took a small video camera into 2 Codex meetings in 1998. These grainy videos are all that remain of the tapes, which mysteriously disappeared.
Agenda number 5 on vitamins and minerals.
Are you going to strike that second paragraph?
Well, these are draft positions. They're going in a draft position. So they're not the final nor the formal position.
You've seen a letter from Ron Paul, then, and this was signed by Ron Paul, Congressman Stump, and Congressman Cook.
We have received a lot of mail. We've looked at all of it.
And you acknowledge that this represents the will of the American people and the will of Congress, correct?
There's a wide range of opinions in this one.
Despite multiple written requests and the intervention of a U.S. congressman, the FDA refused to answer any questions about Codex, dietary supplements, or even labeling for this documentary. But judging from his rare interview with Michael R. Taylor, then Deputy Commissioner for Policy at the FDA, it is apparent that the agency is unaccustomed to meaningful questions about health policy by the media.
You stated your concern, and the FDA certainly has, on L-tryptophan. What about your concern regarding something like Prozac? It's very well documented, 28,000 adverse reports, 1,600 suicides associated with that drug.
Well, drugs that go through our very rigorous testing and review process are very well understood chemicals, and drugs are recognized to have both risks and benefits. That's why they go through a rigorous evaluation, and when those products are put out on the market, we have a good scientific understanding of both the risks and benefits, and that's laid out in very detailed labeling that physicians then use to decide whether to prescribe those products for their patients. Side effects are part of pharmaceuticals. That's recognized, and that's why we're so careful scientifically. There's just no comparison between that situation and what we are dealing with dietary supplements, which have not been subjected to that kind of study, have not been evaluated by FDA. And a large part of the problem with these supplements is that we simply don't know about their safety. We don't know about their benefits, yet they're being out there marketed in some cases, for serious disease-related purposes. There's a big difference.
Well, obviously, they would say something along the lines of that it was the only natural alternative to some of these kinds of drugs, and that's a concern to people that want natural alternatives, right, I suppose. Right. And since the cases against Prozac have been so high, people would question whether or not the health risks of L-tryptophan, again, versus Prozac and that kind of usage is judged under the same standards, if you will.
Well,
Well, he mentioned L-tryptophan, and it's just...
As the producers tried to get an answer from the Deputy Commissioner of the FDA,
L-tryptophan, so it really...
Mr. Taylor seemed to lose his patience with the tone of the interview.
Mentioned, so I thought I would follow up on it.
Turn the camera off, we can talk. You know, I'm happy to talk about this. I don't want to spend the whole morning on it.
But of course, Mr. Taylor was anything but happy to discuss the safety record of Prozac versus the amino acid L-tryptophan, which the FDA banned outright when Prozac was approved by the agency. And it is important to note that the Food and Drug Administration has assigned Mr. Taylor's wife, Christine Lewis Taylor, to the World Health Organization, where she is now chairwoman of the Nutrient Risk Assessment Project.
I don't think that you can say that anybody at FDA has ever been a friend of dietary supplements. Anybody. They are friends of the classical reductionist scientific system that is based on cause and effect and doing a bunch of huge and costly studies, which are the backbone of the pharmaceutical industry, which are the driving force of our healthcare system, which is driving us into bankruptcy and killing between 200,000 and 700,000 people a year.